shooter here, or is that simply a precaution that it normally is undertaken when there's a shooting? You always look for somebody else.
Right.
But how do you deal with this situation?
Well, I'm not necessarily convinced yet, Greg, that there is a second shooter. And I'll tell you why. A lot of the earlier reports, as a matter of fact, my source actually said that they know for a fact that one of the shooters had multiple weapons. Now, if that's the case, it's a possibility that maybe because there was different types of rounds, bullets used, people started thinking maybe there's a second shooter. We don't know that yet, but I can tell you that the police department will err on the side of caution, and they're going to approach this situation as if there may be two shooters. Now, one other thing real quickly, a lot of viewers have been asking, why did they shut down or restrict travel out of Reagan National Airport? And let me tell you why. I know exactly why they did it. There's a waterway, the Potomac River, that runs behind the Navy Yard. And you can actually get to the airport by way of the waterway. So if you take a small boat over, you can get to the airport in less than 15 minutes by way of water. That's why they shut the airport down, and they wanted to secure that. As a matter of fact, they alerted our DC Police Harbor Patrol this morning if they see any type of vessels out in the water to pull it over. They haven't seen that, but that's the reason. That's the primary reason, Greg, why they shut the airport down. They are letting planes come in, but nothing's going out quite yet until they get this situation under control.
Well, they're certainly not underestimating whoever's responsible for these shootings, Rod, and it's probably wise at this time to not do so. I'd like it if you could, Rod, because you've been to this Navy Yard, and there's so many different reports about what happened. When did the initial shooting start? We heard around 8:20 this morning. Whether or not that was at a security checkpoint or not is a big question. But when you enter into this Navy Yard, what type of security is greeting you? And also, if you are going into one of the buildings, like Building 197, where the shooting took place, how would you be searched?
Well, I can tell you, Jenna, on a Monday morning especially, there's tons of Navy officers, there's tons of Marines all around that area, there's plenty of police all around that area, and when you pull up to the main entry gate, which I think is probably where the shooting took place, and the only reason I say that is because I saw a picture earlier of a person, a victim, on the ground, and that where he was on the ground was right by the entryway to the Navy Yard. Usually there's about 4 or 5 naval police officers standing there vetting people before they actually go in. Now, once you get in on the grounds, you're pretty much on the grounds. Now, you can go to any building, but keep in mind, Navy police, they're all over that base, so it would be very difficult to bring a weapon on the grounds that quickly and get far onto the grounds. But it sounds like this guy, I believe, targeted that building for a reason, and we have to figure out, we'll find out later on today, but that building, as someone else reported earlier, is where most of the senior executive service members of the Navy is housed. That's where their offices are. For some reason, this guy went directly there, did a lot of the shooting there, and then that's where this guy is head out right now. So it'd be interesting to find out, what was this guy's connection to the military?
And Tom Borelli, picking up on that, your thoughts on the motivation behind this sort of thing. And I know it's early to try to know, but it's a very conspicuous target here.
Absolutely, and that's one of the leads that the FBI and the other law enforcement partners will be pursuing to figure out why is it that particular building. An installation like the Navy Yard with so much security, you almost have to think that somebody had some intelligence going in. This would be a very tough target, in my estimation, to just kind of basically, without any type of surveillance or reconnaissance, or at least having a general description of how the security is set out and the difficulties to move around. It'd be a very tough target. It's not a soft target, it's a fairly hard target. So that leads, the possibility that this is an individual that had at least some level of foreknowledge going into this attack. Again, that's a speculation, and we don't know. The facts are yet to unfold.
A hard target in that you would have to know specifically where you're headed, Don, but on a military base, you're not allowed to carry weapons. At least military personnel who have been issued weapons are not allowed to carry them on a base. And someone working or familiar with the area probably would know that.
That's true. But also there's many security posts. There's different access control at different levels of the perimeter. So again, it's not like a hospital or a movie theater
Sure.
where people can kind of come and go. This is an installation with various levels of security, with cameras, with security personnel, and the like. So it's it takes a pretty gutsy person or persons to take on a military installation.
And that question as to why is always the big question in stories like this. Why would someone choose to shoot anyone? Murdering them, according to the reports that we have. We are still working on the numbers, but we do have confirmation that there are reports of fatalities and injuries. I just want to note the time for our viewers. We're coming up at 11:40 Eastern Time, not quite there, but that's when we expect the president to speak. It was scheduled previously to be a talk about the economy. We understand the president is running slightly behind. We have no indication that he will not speak. We are also awaiting a press conference from local DC law enforcement. That was supposed to take place about 30 minutes ago. We do not have that yet, but we will bring you there as we get that. And we're having just a lot of moving parts here, Greg. It's worth noting, though, really, it's a 3-mile radius between where this Navy Yard is and where the White House is and where Capitol Hill is.
Well, it's very interesting that all of this is taking place within a 3 or 2 mile radius of the White House where the president was going to be speaking, and now all of a sudden that has been put on hold. We don't know if it's because of these events here at the Washington Navy Yard, where several people have lost their lives, according to officials. But I want to go back to Don Borelli. Don, so look, you know this venue, you know the circumstances, you know the personnel. So what would you be looking at here in terms of the shooter?
Well, I guess the thing that's most alarming, especially to law enforcement on the scene, is the fact that the shooter or shooters have been identified as carrying AR-15 military-style weapons, and these weapons are extremely dangerous even to your average law enforcement person. The typical Kevlar vest, the bulletproof vest that most security officers and police officers on patrol will wear are not equipped to stop this type of weaponry. So it takes special protection, which the SWAT teams will be equipped with.
Let me interrupt you just a moment, if I may, Don, because the Associated Press is now reporting the shooter is dead. Let me just read the bulletin, and it just crossed the wires about a minute ago. Federal law enforcement official says the shooter at the Washington Navy Yard has died. Now, we don't know the circumstances, whether he was shot by law enforcement trying to apprehend him, if he killed himself, as is sometimes the case. But nevertheless, we haven't received word, Jenna, as to whether a second shooter has been apprehended.
Exactly. And that's one of the confusing parts of this early morning report. We initially heard one shooter with multiple injuries, multiple fatalities. Now, just during our hour, Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon confirmed that law enforcement is looking into the possibility of 2 shooters, and one of the reasons is different bullets found and different victims. But we also heard reports that one of the shooters had 2 different weapons. So this is what we're trying to work through, and it could explain, though, this information, Greg, and we're going to work to confirm it ourselves, why we haven't seen the press conference as of yet, and why we also are potentially waiting on the president in any sort of press briefing that he might bring us as well.
Right. They may be awaiting firm confirmation, but again, the Associated Press reporting that federal law enforcement official is now saying that the shooter, and not multiple shooters here, but the shooter, according to this federal official, at the Washington Navy Yard has died. We don't know the circumstances in which he died. One would assume it would be one of 2 ways. He was either shot by law enforcement trying to apprehend him or end the situation, or he took his own life. But we should get further details at the news conference. And there you see on the left-hand side of your screen the cameras and the microphones that are set up here for this news conference, which is now delayed. Probably, one would speculate, because of this. And the president's speech at the White House on the economy has also been delayed. Now, that may simply be because he's often late at his own news conferences, but we'll wait and see.
Let's just recap a little bit if we can here. 8:20 this morning, East Coast time, reports of a shooting at the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. A big question as to whether or not there are multiple shooters, but we have been able to confirm that there are multiple deaths and multiple injuries. The nature of the injuries is something we're waiting on. We're hoping to hear from the hospitals as to what they're seeing from the victims brought into their hospitals. If you joined us a little earlier in our broadcast here on Fox News, you saw these helicopters flying around Building 197. That is the building where the shooting took place. It's an area where there are both active duty military, but also contractors working on different projects related to the Navy, shipbuilding and procurement of weapons, things like that. You're seeing tape on the top of your screen, I believe, guys. Is that tape or is that live? Because we've seen these helicopters. This is tape. So this is what we've seen throughout the morning, these helicopters swirling around the top of these buildings, and at times it looked like lowering people down and also bringing people up. We saw maybe a total of 3 or 4 people brought up. A big question about whether or not those were injured. Were they law enforcement? We're still waiting for some of those details.
Reuters is putting it differently, grammatically, which is very interesting. They say U.S. Navy official is confirming one shooter is down in the U.S. Navy Yard shooting, which leaves, obviously, the possibility of a second or third shooter, which the latest we heard from military officials was they were still searching for a second shooter. The Associated Press seemed to suggest that it was over because the shooter was down and has been killed. So, we still don't know yet whether this is over, but we may learn more on the left-hand side of your screen when we receive information from officials there at the scene. They say, and now I'm reading the latest AP, officials say at least one shooter has died, so now they're sort of backing off saying the shooter. Now they're saying at least one shooter has died, where several people were killed, as many as 10 were wounded.
We're getting some more information from our Justice Department and from our sources on the ground about what actually is transpiring inside the Navy Yard at this time. And what we understand is that the same team that helped pull Johar Tsarnaev from the boat in Boston when there was a great concern about additional explosives and what was actually going to transpire in the city of Boston, that same team is on the ground in the Navy Yard, and so they're really not taking anything off the table. We may have this report that one shooter is dead, but a question about whether or not there's still a risk to the area, that's obviously something that law enforcement is not taking very lightly and continuing to work multiple angles.
Absolutely, and let's work our multiple angles. Steve Santoni is standing by live with the latest information. Steve?
Well, the latest is the Metropolitan Department is planning to hold a news conference here and tell us whatever they can tell us. We don't know when that'll happen. They said stand by, they'll try to put somebody up. It's a very fluid situation is all we really got out of them. That may be an understatement. This situation seems to be not totally resolved, seems to be changing. We saw a lot of emergency vehicles speeding toward the scene earlier this morning. Then we saw them all speeding away from the scene the other direction. We don't know exactly what that might indicate, if anything. We don't know the number of casualties, whether anybody's been killed for sure. Certainly the Navy said earlier several people were injured. That's been confirmed. We don't know the number of fatalities. We don't know the number of injuries. But certainly a bad situation as workers arrived here at Building 197 on the Washington Navy Yard, 8:20 this morning when a gunman opened fire. Now the building is 4 stories and has a large atrium on the inside.
We seem to have lost our live shot with Steve Santoni. Let me know if we get it back, because that may happen any moment now.
And we're actually getting some brand new information from a Washington area hospital as well as to what is the nature of the injuries. Apparently there was just a briefing at the Washington Hospital Center, and at that hospital there are 3 individuals at this time. What the hospital is reporting, that there was one woman who was lifted from the roof, there was one woman who was shot in the head, and one male DC officer who's in surgery right now. They're all considered to be in critical condition, and this is again just a small portion of the report earlier that we had multiple injured and also some fatalities. So now we're starting to get an idea of at least what happened to these poor people inside this building today.
Let's go to Peter Ducey, who has been all over this story with really terrific reporting this morning on the scene initially. Peter, what have you been able to learn?
Well, Greg, I mentioned the last time that we were talking that a DC Metro police vehicle, a big truck that's obscured right now by a bus that was just parked in this lot, came out about an hour ago, maybe a little bit more, and they made a loud PA announcement. They were blasting it over the wall into the area that right now where the scene is, where the shooting took place, and they were saying, they were giving an order for everybody to shelter in place until an all clear has been given. We have not moved too far away from here, and we're really just about 150 yards away from where that truck is, and we have not heard them give an all clear, at least over that PA system. Now, last time also we spoke, the weather was really, really nasty, but it has cleared up a little bit now, and the helicopters we have seen consistently all morning long after we were here for about 30 minutes. So basically for about the last 2 hours, really circling, really concentrated on one area. We've had one helicopter flying real low. That's the one that we've seen dropping in officers and equipment. And we have seen other helicopters much higher in the sky. A lot of traffic above us. But as far as we can tell, things have not changed. The officers are not acting like the situation really is any less severe right now. In fact, as I was listening to Steve Santani just now, an officer pulled up in what looked like his personal car and was armoring up. He was putting on full body armor that he was taking out of his truck, and he headed on down toward the scene. So that's where we are right now. Things are still very tense, and we don't have any kind of an update that it's okay for people to let their guard down yet.
Yeah, fluid situation, obviously. A moment ago, you saw an individual in front of the cameras and the microphones announcing that the news conference will begin momentarily. Peter, stay with us. I'm coming back to you in just a second. I just wanted to let our viewers know what they were seeing. They were seeing apparently the public information officer for the Navy shipyard who was giving heads up to the reporters there on the scene that the news conference will begin momentarily. But Jenna, it would suggest that if they're going to hold the news conference at this point, at that location, that the situation is resolved. You know, I don't want to speculate, but the notice here is that the shooter is down, and one would suspect that they would not hold a news conference if there were multiple shooters.
We have no description of a second shooter yet, and we want to be totally transparent about that. We, over the last hour, have told you about whether or not there is a second shooter or someone that has not been apprehended, and we don't have a description to share with you on that. So we're urging some caution with those reports, but we know that law enforcement is looking into the possibility that that is the case here. I just want to go back with something else that we just mentioned to you on the air. The scene at the Navy Yard is still an active investigation scene, and the best of the best team from the ATF, the special response team, is on site, and what they're looking for is any sort of explosives. These are the same guys that responded to the Boston terrorist attack, and so there is great caution in that big facility that has 3,000 people working at it every day about what potentially has been left behind, what is actually there. Why they're looking into that, we don't know, but they obviously have some precaution on that point. We're also still waiting to know if there are folks that are still inside those buildings that have yet to be evacuated. Remember, there was a shelter in place set up for those buildings, and apparently there's still folks inside. Retired Major General Bob Scales joins me now. He's also a Fox News contributor, and he has frequented this Navy Yard. And General Scales, just a tough day with so much unknown right now. And the only thing that we do know is that some people and the lives of their loved ones have changed forever today, and we just don't know all the specifics yet.
Yeah, Jenna, you know, I remember sitting in this very same seat, 5 or 6 years ago during the Fort Hood shooting. I think, actually, I was talking to Greg at this very time, relatively speaking, where we literally were sitting here in agony worrying about our teammates, our shipmates, and how well they were doing and speculating about who the shooter is. One quick point. Some folks have asked, how can a guy sneak a weapon onto the Navy Yard? The answer is, if you have a valid military ID or a contractor's card and you're in a vehicle, those vehicles are only periodically opened and checked. If you have no idea, then you go into another lane where your trunk is opened, your hood is open, and the officers look inside. So God forbid, if this shooter has either the contractor card or the ID card, he could very easily have taken a bag full of weapons into the Navy Yard and not been detected, Jenna.
Yeah. You know, General Scales, Greg Jarrett, you're right. We were together that terrible day at Fort Hood. And we couldn't make sense of it, if I recall correctly. I mean, it was so confounding and horrible. And yet we have it here again today. So when you heard about this at the Navy Yard, and you've been there many times, I mean, what were your thoughts?
Well, you know, there are about 5 sort of military totems in Washington, D.C. that have long been targets of terrorists and wackos. And that's Fort Myer, that houses the Old Guard, Fort McNair, that houses National Defense University, the Navy Yard, which is Navy Systems Command, and Andrews Air Force Base, which of course houses Air Force One. And anytime you go in any of these installations, you immediately can sense the tension that the guards there are on constant alert. Not just to go through and search everybody who comes in, but they're constantly looking to stop any type of craziness like this. Because these are installations that aren't forts in the classical sense, like the Navy Yard. It's a workplace, and for a few senior naval officers, it's actually their home. And so for those of us who spent many years in the military and view our military installations, particularly those in DC's, as sanctuaries and monuments, Greg, this is particularly offensive.
General Scales, if you would stand by with us. Don Borelli's still with us, Rod Wheeler as well. And Don, you've worked in a variety of different task forces that have responded to emergencies like this. And although we mentioned the comparison to Fort Hood earlier, because it's a natural comparison at a military base, is shooting a lot of questions. You mentioned something early on that I think is important. This was a big base, and whoever did this shooting seemed to have a focus about where they were heading.
It seems that on the surface, and I'm basing that just on what's been reported. So we don't know that to be a fact, but if this person actually made his way to a specific building that is the location where many of the high-level executives work from, that possibly leads to speculation that he had specific targets in mind. And with that, then, as going back to your other guests have said, what do we know about this person or persons? Did they work in this building as contractors or military? Did they have relatives? What level of intelligence do they have that possibly could give them a bit of an edge over the average person? And the other thing that's worrisome, and we were mentioning this before, is the weaponry. Obviously, when somebody's using military-style weapons, but do they have the training that goes with that? If somebody has tactical training that could also give them a bit of an advantage over the average person, this is something that law enforcement needs to absolutely be concerned with. And that's why I think you see that the situation is unfolding slowly, because the SWAT teams are taking their time, they're securing the perimeter, and there's no reason to put anybody in harm's way. Time right now is on the side of the SWAT teams to do this methodically and carefully.
All right. There you see choppers who have been retrieving some of the injured, some of the individuals who may have been rushed to area hospitals moments ago. This has just come into us. Here is a doctor at a local hospital. Take a listen.
Tragedy at the Navy Yards. Multiple individuals have been shot. We have report of individuals who have died at the scene, and we have a transportation of 3 gunshot victims to our hospital at this time.
Right, MedStar Washington Area Hospital, one of the venues where people who were injured in the shooting at the Navy shipyard were taken, and there you see the chopper shot from a short while ago as they rescued some of the victims off the top of the roof. We do not have any firm confirmation on the number of fatalities or injured, and that will likely change, so we're very hesitant to even give you that information.
Reuters is also reporting that area hospitals are saying they expect more of the injured to come to them. So there's still that note that, again, it's developing. We don't really know if everyone has gotten out of the complex as of yet. Also, just to note, as we're continuing to question this motive, this question of terrorism often comes up. We don't want to ignore that question, but we have received no indication from anyone or any sort of commentary that that is the motivation in this case. In fact, we just asked the Secret Service if there's any additional precautions being taken at or around the White House. Again, the White House is only about a little over 2 miles driving from this area that you're seeing on your screen, and the Secret Service, the spokesman, simply answered no at this time. So Rod, to you, a homicide detective, the Secret Service says they're not taking extra precaution. We get the word, according to the Associated Press, that one shooter is dead. There still is this question of a second shooter, but based on the information that we have right now, where do we go from here?
We do want to mention, I'm sorry, let me just toss in here, Rod, and I'll let you answer in a second. The president has been delayed now. At the White House, he was going to speak, and there you see the podium at the White House indoors. He was going to speak on the economy. This has been planned for several days. Talk about the 5-year anniversary of the financial meltdown, as it was known. We have no word as to whether the president will address the situation nearby, within a couple of miles from the White House. I'm sorry, Jenna.
No, it's okay, Rod. Go ahead and take it from here, because here we are about 4 hours since the initial reports of the shooting. We know the little that we know. At this point, where do we go from here?
Well, Jenna, I continue to get updates from my sources on the scene, and let me just share with you and the viewers real quickly what I just learned. There's a police officer, an MPD officer, fellow officer of mine, over at the MedStar unit, which is the Washington Hospital Center, in critical condition. From what I understand, that's the officer that engaged in a gun battle with this gunman. And the other thing that I just learned is that the police now have entered the 3rd and 4th floor of the building. And from what I understand, the shooter, his body is still over there in building 197. Now, this has not been confirmed yet, but that's what I'm hearing from several sources on the ground there. So again, it's still a fluid situation. The police are clearing out the building right now. What does that mean? That means that they're going to rule out at some point whether or not there was, in fact, a second shooter. They're looking for various weapons that could have been used by the one person that apparently has died over there. And that's the reason, Jenna, why it's been somewhat quiet over the past hour. I actually got that text message about 45 minutes ago that this person had expired in the building over there. But again, we're just waiting for official confirmation.
And just so our viewers know, Rodney, how much time have you spent with the D.C. Law enforcement?
12 years with the police department, and then most of my time was spent in homicide.
So at this point, we're awaiting the presser from the D.C. Metropolitan Police, and we understand that the Navy is on the lead on the scene. The FBI is also working on the scene as well. At this point in the investigation, how are all these pieces working together, and what is the questions that you'd be seeking to answer at this time?
Well, there's a lot of questions, obviously, in a situation like this. The primary question is, who is this individual that came onto the grounds? Were there any warning signs with this person? As we know, with Nadal Hassan down at Fort Hood, there were warning signs. With this individual, was there warning signs? Why did this individual choose today, a rainy Monday here in Washington, D.C., to go into the Navy Yard, which he should have known is very well protected and secure? Why are the questions that we still have to ask? And I can tell you that the various police agencies, ranging from the ATF, who's investigating the type of weapon this guy was used, to the DC police, to the FBI, we're all trying to figure out who was this guy, put the pieces together, and whether or not he in fact targeted any particular individual. We always have to look at the first victims, Jenna, in a situation like this, the first victims that were shot. Why were these individuals shot? But it sounds to me in this case, the first victim was one of those security officers or police officers from the Navy that stands outside there on 8th Street. 8th and M is where they stand out, and it seems like that's where this guy went in. And you know what? That's the main entryway onto that naval base.
And Rod, just so our viewers know, many of them probably have not been on a military base. I know I had my first experience only a few years ago. It's not something that we do on a regular basis, most likely, unless you're attached to the military in some way or a civilian working on this base. But when you enter here at the Navy Yard, would someone search your car? Would they look through my handbag as I go into the parking lot? Would they wait to do that until I reach one of the buildings? How is security done there?
Right. Good question. Real quickly here, if you have an appointment with somebody on the military establishment, the military grounds, you have to go through a certain lane of traffic. They do search your car. They look underneath your car with mirrors. You do have to provide identification, and you have to give the name of the person you're there to see. Now, on the other hand, if you are a military personnel, a member of our military, or a contractor, you go through a different lane of traffic, not quite as extensive checking of your vehicle. You just show your ID, you get a pass, and then you go onto the grounds at that point. What's interesting again about this case is that the shooting apparently started right at the gate, which makes me wonder, and again, I'm just speculating here, was this guy in fact a member of the military? Because if he was, he would not have had to start shooting at the gate because he could actually went onto the grounds. Again, we're just speculating here, but we'll find out those answers soon enough today.
We've been showing our viewers, and we're awaiting a news conference from police authorities. We've been showing the various police authorities, Rod, who have been responding to the scene, who have been handling the situation. But this is federal territory, is it not? Thus, the feds have jurisdiction.
Well, it depends. When it comes down to homicide in the District of Columbia, Greg, we work with the Navy police, obviously, but the D.C. homicide branch will be heavily involved in that situation. I had a case on the naval base years ago involving naval officers, and I took the lead on that case. So it really just depends on the variables involved in this case. The Navy